Rusty, would you take 37 seconds and talk about Watts, please?
Started last night, going very good. Seems like we have enough volunteers. If anybody has a desire to do a breakfast, please let me know. That's probably where we are the shortest, wouldn't even have to come and serve if you could prepare it and either bring it in the morning, which is like 5-ish, which might be too early, or bring it here the night before and then I can pick it up myself. So if anybody has any, would like to do that in some capacity, it can be as simple or as much as you would like.
But you could probably use one more person in the mornings between at least 5
yeah.
and 6.
Well, yeah. On certain mornings, yes. I have one. Yeah.
So there's no such thing as too much help, right? But there's definitely is things such as not enough help. Right. So please step forward, right? Yep. And Rusty, the location.
The old First Christian Church down on
First United Methodist. Yep. And I said that because he didn't know where it was, and I wanted to make sure he knew. Very good. Thank you. All right, Luke chapter 6. Pastor Larry has set me up today. There's no way we're going to get this lesson done and cover everything I'd like to cover. But we're going to do the best we can. So we got to move pretty fast. So some things to keep in mind. This is a revolutionary teaching that Pastor or that Jesus is teaching here. It's revolutionary from a lot of standpoints. I want you to see the group that he's talking to. Remember that he is talking to groups of people who have an inherent dislike for anybody that is not like them. He is talking to people who for generations have celebrated the history that they have. Campbell? One of us is going to teach today. Which one's going to be, brother? Okay. All right. Very good. So for generations, this group of people has celebrated the fact that they escaped slavery that had been there for almost 400 years. They had escaped slavery in Egypt. They talk about that. They celebrate that. They have religious observances around it and appreciate that these folks absolutely despise and yes, even hate those who believe differently than them. And now they're an occupied people. Rome has been there for everybody who is listening to Jesus talk, pretty much everybody. Rome has been there the entire time of their life, okay? And so they despise the Romans. The Romans are considered unclean by their religion. And then Jesus drops them this bomb, okay? And so, Mark, where is your wonderful wife?
She's at home sleeping.
She is. Stacy, when you watch this later on, Kelly, will you do us the honor?
Of course. Not anymore.
All right, very good.
Of course.
Yeah, we're everybody call her phone here just a minute.
I'm sure it's there. Close.
So, as Kelly's going to be kind enough to read to us, I just want you to listen to the revolutionary comments that Jesus is about to tell these people, okay? Remember how the little introduction I just gave you? That's how they're thinking. That's how they feel, okay? Yes, ma'am, please.
Okay. But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you. And if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you.
Thank you. One way that that's said in one translation is at the very end, people will fill your pocket. People will fill your pocket. So again, I want you to appreciate that Jesus is talking to people who basically their lifetime, they have been in an occupied country by people who, it's one thing to think that the people who occupy your country are just stronger, smarter, better, or whatever. But yet, I kind of know them. And even though I don't like being in an occupied country, at least, they kind of think like us, right? I mean, the Romans are so antithetical to everything that a Jew would believe or feel that it just absolutely grated at them every day that they saw somebody from Rome. And the Romans, what brilliant people they are when it comes to conquering countries, because they were smart enough to know that, look, we need to put some Jewish people in charge, and we'll have a governor there, but they'll also have a governor, and that governor will deal with a lot of the day-to-day stuff, and the Roman governor will deal with the overarching issues in the interest of Rome. And so that certainly helped them. And they did that in most countries that they conquered. But I want you to recognize that for a Jew, what Jesus is telling them is so different. So I put on your outline what I thought was really good. Hillel, who's considered one of the greatest Jewish rabbis, was once asked to teach the whole law while he stood on one leg. If you had to stand on one leg, how would you teach the whole law? Think about that. You don't stand there very long, right? And for some of us with knee issues, I can't stand on my right knee very long at all without some pain, right? So you got to do it really quickly. And remember, they're dealing with 613 written laws, and then there's the oral laws that all the Pharisees kind of arrived at on their own. So we're talking volumes and volumes and volumes of eventually written down laws, rules, regulations, righteousness, acts of righteousness that a Jewish person should be subject to. So here's what he says. What is hateful to thee, do not to another. That is the whole law, and all else is explanation. Okay. Now, Pastor Larry asked this question today. Is it possible to come to a place in our faith journey to have love in our hearts for those who hate us? All right. Now, the fill in the blank, Kim, you're always really good at this. The pressure sister now.
What's about 5 things?
I know. Yeah, too many? Okay. The answer is, so the question is this, how do we love those who hate us? How do we love those who think so differently from us? How do we love those that don't believe like we do? How do we love us? And the answer is,
I don't think I know.
Well, you have
one word.
The answer is not. Okay, go ahead, Beverly.
I was going to say about the grace of God, but your answer is great.
That's pretty good.
Oh gosh, can you come to our house and do some training?
Because of Jesus.
Seems like maybe
The answer is not on our own. Not on our own. You were close. Yes, you were. You were only one word off, though. See?
there's not enough letters there.
I think you needed
Not
a
on our own.
comma Lord.
Your word.
Their words.
What's the possible?
The comma, I think it's not on our own
Not
board.
on our own.
That's not a comma.
It's not
It should be no
comma.
comma.
No
There should be
comma.
there should be no comma. Unless it's not on our
Wait a
own
minute,
board.
it's my sentence.
I want a comma Lord or something.
Okay, all those who don't live in Virginia aren't allowed to talk.
Unzipped.
The problem is you're too genetically connected. Neither one of you can talk.
Everyone else threw their hands up long ago.
I marked it out. I marked it up.
All right, we're moving on,
I marked
okay?
it out.
I told you.
Here's the
You
point.
brought the entertainment day.
Entertainment, he should be upstairs. It's even worse.
I want you to appreciate this. Look, there's no way that I believe there's any human that can do this on their own, that can really love others that are diametrically opposed to them with any consistency. I think it's, as Beverly said, by the grace of God. Okay, so think about that. Now, here's what's interesting. Jesus, he turns the tide on the teaching, see? Remember what the rabbi said at the beginning, Hillel. He said, what is hateful to someone or to you, don't do it to another. Jesus is talking about doing things versus not doing things. He's talking about the positive versus the negative. And that changes everything. A number of philosophers in the world, when asked, what's the ultimate rule, would often say things from a negative perspective, like Hillel did, okay? What's hateful to you, don't do to others. Instead, Jesus turned it around, right? He really turns it around when he says, do to others as you would have them do to you. So he's talking about doing things versus not doing things. So remember, the 10 Commandments is, depending on your translation, thou shalt not, right? And remember in the Beatitudes the other week, we talked about the fact that Jesus said, blessed are you. And so I want you to appreciate that Jesus is taking the laws that people had learned, their behaviors they had learned, and instead making it a positive action versus a negative reaction or negative thought to a positive thought. So God has intentions of taking us out of our normal thinking, right? Normal thinking is, I am this side of the political aisle, they're this side of the political aisle. I have to fight through that, right? I have to fight with them. I believe this, they believe that. There's no way we can come to any kind of terms or agreements.
Does that make them an enemy?
It should.
In some people's books.
Until
In
they
some
start
people's books.
Then would they be an enemy?
So in answer to Steve's question, what is the answer? Does that make them an enemy because they think differently than us? It shouldn't, but does it?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Okay. So look at our next sentence. This one is only one at a time. Okay. And that is a period at the end, and it is appropriate to have it there too. So Jesus teaches us to be what?
Kind.
Not bad. Not bad. Good. Keep going. From what we just talked about, Jesus teaches us to be different. We can't be like the rest of society as people of faith. Look, it is a perfectly normal response to hate the behavior of other people. It's a typical normal response to hate or dislike the way they think because it's not like me.
But now that's the difference. Disliking their actions versus disliking them, isn't it? Yeah. See, you just said it different.
It absolutely should be, but is it?
Yep.
In today's society, what ends up happening when we disagree on something?
Demonize the other side.
Yeah, we demonize the other side. I mean, we suddenly make it very personal. Okay, we suddenly make it very personal. Any of you that have been in business that have had customer disagreements, if you've been there a long time, you have seen the vitriol, the anger that seems to have grown in the past 10, 15 years versus what it used to be. And it's amazing to me. And I've been in business world daily anyway for about a year and a half, 2 years. But I witnessed in the 31 years I was there. Just 30 years ago, okay, there was a problem, you were able to resolve it, right? Now it's instantly social media, bashing, anger, hurtfulness, just amazing how far it's come. Society in general, when you watch news, you look at now protest, it's one thing to hold up a sign and a placard and to shout or chant something. It's another thing to start setting buildings on fire and hurting people. We've gone to a point of where disagreements now are hate. And look, on any level, where does disagreements end and where does hate start? Okay, where does that go? And for some people, it's like in 37 seconds, and for other people, it takes 37 years to get there. Okay, yes, Omar?
All right. Without God's intervention, can we get back to the way things used to be?
Maybe we've changed our own thought process, that we've forgotten certain things and we've remembered certain things. So my mental outlook is skewed. Maybe it was worse for me in the 60s than it is right now, but I lived through the 60s. I carried the gun with the fire.
Yes, ma'am.
I think we're here because we abandoned this duty back in the 50s till now. We have allowed this to happen. We have colluded with it, we have participated in it. I think it's all on us, the church, that we walked off the field and let it happen.
Yeah, much like the Jordan Peterson point that you said. Yeah.
My word of the day is self-inflicted.
Your word of the day is
I use that oftentimes now.
That's actually 2 words.
No, it has a hyphen. It makes it wrong.
No, it is.
I couldn't resist.
I just did that.
I tried to fade her, but you didn't go for it.
A lot of it's self-inflicted. I mean, a lot of the misery we have, as far as complaining about, in my case, a lot of the misery you have at school is self-inflicted. In my personal opinion, I'm not that expert, but
well,
we brought it on ourselves, but exactly what you're saying, basically.
So self-inflicted, though, is something that I can't take responsibility for. It has to be somebody's fault, right?
As a group, self is a plural word in that case.
Yeah, so we often can't accept the responsibility of what we have done to help put us where we are, right? So we want to blame somebody else. But look, so Jesus, look at your outline. Jesus teaches us to be different. Now look at this question. Are you the same as everyone else? Remember, look, what everybody else is doing who isn't a believer doesn't mean that I should be the same, right? Jesus calls us as people of faith to be different than everyone else. So if we're going to stand in our faith, that means we have to think and act and react differently. Now look, I also put this in. Jesus is asking us to, break's a good word. What's another 4-letter word? Begins with S and ends with top. Okay, good. Stop the cycle of injustice and injury. Okay, stop or break. We've got to be the ones who end this, right? We have to be. I can't wait for everybody else to do it. If it doesn't start in my world, then how can I expect everybody else for it to happen in their world?
But how can you? Start with yourself and your neighbor. No, I'm speaking of when you're so diametrically opposed to, either the politics of others or the decisions of others that are negatively affecting our world. How do we, isn't that why we're in the place where we are? Because we haven't reacted?
It's a great question. Answer?
So I have this.
We do exactly exactly what the first century Christians did, because in a relatively short period of time of a couple hundred years, they converted the entire Roman Empire to their way of thinking.
So I have a thing that I just read recently that I think speaks somewhat to this. Opinion is really the lowest form of human knowledge. Yeah. It requires no accountability, no understanding. The highest form of knowledge is empathy, for it requires us to suspend our egos and live in another's world.
Wow, that's good. Read that one more time. That was good.
Good. Opinion is really the lowest form of human knowledge. It requires no accountability, no understanding. The highest form of knowledge is empathy, for it requires us to suspend our egos and live in another's world.
So then let's go to my next question on your outline. What might injustice and injury look like? There's really another question in there, but I wanted to ask it that way.
Well, you just described it a while ago. Now, riot is not just holding a sign, it's people acting out in anger. But sometimes I think this generation uses that as an excuse. They just want to be bad. They have an excuse to tear things up.
The consequence.
That's injustice, and that's injury to our personal property, to our personal bodies at times.
It is personal. That's the word. That's what because what is injustice to me may not be injustice to you. And what injures me may not injure you. So I think it goes back to that empathy of trying to view things not from your point of view, but from multiple points of view. And then that's what makes us different.
And I believe that's really where I wanted that question to go. The concept of injury, the concept of injustice is really a relative statement for most people. Look, Dix Hollow Road, BLM is not going to come to Dix Hollow Road.
And since you're not directly involved with that at that point on Dix Hollow Road, it's going to be easier for you to love them at a distance. If they're your neighbors on that to your property, you're going to have some remorse and vengeance build up, and it's going to be harder to love them. Yeah. You really want to have to pull on them.
So injury and injustice, Dix Hollow Road is a long ways away, right? Yeah. Injury and justice is really a personal opinion or feeling, right? You just heard what Laura said about opinions, right? It's kind of the lowest form of IQ, of EQ, emotional quotient, right? So here's what I want you to appreciate. Everybody in this room, if we asked you to define something that personally you would define that happened in your life that is an injustice or an injury, not talking necessarily physical injury, could be, but an emotional or a mental injury that you felt or experienced, all of us would have a different story. Something that you feel is an injustice or maybe would hurt you, would kind of injure you, so to speak, I might just go, I might laugh it off. And something that just really gets to my quick, makes me angry, you may look at it and go, why in the world did that bother you? Right? So look, if that's the case, here's what's really remarkable about our God. His Spirit can work in you to deal with those very things in that very level, whatever it is. So the things that really get to you and bother you, I may laugh off, go to sleep without a single thought about something like that tonight, and not even wake up wondering about it. Whereas at 3:31 this morning, when I woke up thinking about something in particular, you would probably, if I described that to you, you would laugh and say, why are you worried about that? Why is that on your mind? Why does that bother you, right? So since it's so deeply personal, we have to rely and have faith in the fact, and I believe it's true, that God will work individually with us on the injuries and the injustices that we feel. But here's where the rub comes. Here's where the strain comes. I put it on your outline. Do we want to be as good as our neighbors?
No. Yeah. No, we want to
be better.
Okay, we want to be as good as Jesus. So good. You jumped right ahead. So what's the problem with that level of comparison? If I'm going to compare myself, if I'm going to compare my actions and reactions in life to those who are not of the faith, to those, what's that?
You're always better than them. You need to
Yeah, I not that, okay, good. I agree with your wording, but not from a standpoint of I'm better than them.
You think you're better
It's
than them.
I need to react differently than them. I need to act differently than them. I need to process differently than the world does, right? So look, we use this language. If somebody who doesn't believe in Jesus, doesn't believe in God, doesn't really understand the way we think, they come in here and they're going to just walk out of here and yeah, they're going to want to commit me and you and everybody else, right? But look, we can't say, well, you know, I reacted that way because that's the way my neighbor acted. Mm-hmm. We've now possibly, from the spiritual standpoint, lowered our standards, right? We may have said, well, that's what they did, so I just did the same thing. Jesus is saying, look, it's not about negative. They treated me this way, so I treated them that way back. It's not about that. He's saying, instead, do more. Treat them the way you want to be treated. Yes, ma'am.
About 30 years ago in this building, we did a Bible study. The lady, Lord changed me. When we had a disagreement, mainly maybe with our spouse or family member, and now we can move one out to the neighbor. They didn't think like us. They did things differently. Instead of praying for them to change to make it easy for you, it was, Lord, pray for yourself. Change me to see it in their eyes, to see their side of it. Lord, change me. Change my attitude.
So if injury and injustice is a personal point of reference for all of us, me included, right? If it is, then I have to some degree try to understand why you are behaving, acting, reacting, feeling the way you feel, right?
This is part of our problem with the generation of what's going on now is nobody takes responsibility for their actions. You know, the complaint is, well, I reacted that way because of you or them and what's going on. No, you reacted that way because you felt like reacting that way. And you see it in, you know, the young people, it's just like, well, it's not my fault. It's because they looked at me.
Right. That's what I wrote down. The problem with that level of comparison is it removes any personal accountability. Right. So you don't have to be personally accountable for anything as long as you're saying that you react some way based on someone else's actions.
Yes. And look, personal accountability is a great concept. What Jesus calls us to, though, is it's not personal accountability. It's Jesus accountability. Right? It's Holy Spirit accountability. Right? So look, if I'm going to compare myself to my neighbor, I'll be a decent guy, right? But is that what God calls me to do? In my prayer time, do you think God expects me to say, I want to be just like my neighbor, Lord, make me just like my neighbor? Or am I supposed to say, make me more like Jesus, right? Yes, ma'am.
I have an example of where someone did me wrong, and I was really angry. It was a gentleman that had done some work for me. He lived in the same mobile home park as I do for 3 or 4 months, and I always paid him, and he always showed up to do his work. So I trusted him. And at the beginning of when all the leaves, because basically I live in the woods with a lot of leaves, I said, Michael, how much would you charge me to clean the leaves up for the whole season? And we agreed on $100. Well, I went ahead and gave him the $100 prior to the beginning of it. He never showed up. I was quite angry about that and really ticked off. But I did find a young man to do it for me, and I paid him. About 2 weeks ago, I was on my way to
Martin's to pick up a prescription. Well, if I have to leave the park, go down 7 East and make a U-turn to come back 7 West.
Now, you're not about to admit that you ran over him, because that could be a...
No, in where you make the turnaround, there was this car stopped. And it waited, and I waited. And finally I see this. So I pulled up alongside of him. The window was up. I said, "Hi, do you need some help?" Guess who it was? Well, we're out of gas. And there was this young girl sitting with him, no coat on, shivering. And I said, "Well, okay." I left. Now, I went to Martin's, picked my prescription up. Backing up, I felt so guilty because I left him there and did not help him. I went all the way back 7, all the way to the U-turn. He was still sitting there. And I said, "Michael," I said, "if you want to get in my car, I'll take you to my house and I will get a gas can and get gas, but you have to pay for the gas." He said, "Thank you." He said, "but I have help coming." Now, honestly, I felt guilty about leaving him there. And I felt like saying, "Well, you should have money. You got my $100.
So,
but
I
felt
what do you think
guilty.
what do you think made you feel guilty?
I think God was saying, "Sandy, you're better than that. Go back and help him."
So look, that's how we often, people all the time will say, and me too, will say, I haven't heard from God lately. That's how God speaks. It's not always an audible command, right? It's not always a billboard or a Q102 PSA announcement. It's usually in ways that our spirit just kind of gets convicted, or our spirit kind of nudges us, or our spirit kind of gives us that thought, okay? Now look, on our outline, Jesus lived with others in mind. And I'm sure you can think of thousands of examples. But remember that he thought about others all the time. When he was in the Pharisees' house and he was reclining at a table. Remember in those days when they ate formally, they literally would recline, lean on their left elbow and eat with their right hand. Okay, so that meant their feet were out from the table. And it said, some of your translations say an ordinary woman, a woman of the world, basically was a prostitute, came into the house and was so tearful, and she broke an alabaster jar, it's called, and poured perfume on his feet, and her tears cleaned his feet, right? And so the Pharisee thought in his mind, if he was a true prophet of God, if he was a true teacher, he would know what kind of woman that is. And so Jesus said to him, "Simon," this is what he thought, he didn't say it. "Simon, let me ask you a question. Who would think they had been forgiven more? The man who owed someone 500 denarii or 5 denarii? 500 denarii would be 500 days' wages. Okay, a denarius was 1 day's wages. Or one who owed 5 to someone and neither could pay, and the man forgave both of them. Who would be more grateful?" He said, "Well, I suppose, Lord, it would be the one who owed the most." He said, "You have judged rightly. You have judged rightly." Or correctly. So think about that. Jesus was constantly thinking of those who had the most injury and injustice to them. Yes, ma'am.
"Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do."
Perfect. Yep. So think of examples and examples. Now, I wrote down here your 10 square feet. You've heard me talk about this concept before. It's a philosophy of looking at what others are going through. So think in terms of 10 square feet. My little part of the world, your little sphere of influence, right? You know that better than anybody else. For people who have been working at a task for a long time, if you really want to know how to fix some of their issues, get inside their 10 square feet because they know that, right? They understand their world. Now, sometimes they may be confused about outside that 10 square feet, but they know their 10 square feet. You know your life. You know it better than I do. That doesn't mean that maybe I can't come from the outside and help you or aid you or hold you accountable. That can happen. But your 10 square feet is what you feel most sincere and serious about. So you have to appreciate that what we're talking about is just it's 10,000 foot stuff. It's not an individual example of the injustice that Sandy felt or the injustice that you felt about the way somebody treated you recently. All right. So that being the case, you have to take these things to God because God can deal with the whatever it is, 7 billion different examples of injustice and injury that people have felt. So look at the question, how can we love those who don't love us or even hates us? How can we do that? So look, there's gazillions, but there's a couple here, I believe 6, that I really wanted to just give you today so you could think about. What are some methods that we can use? One is the concept of substitution. So the concept of substitution, what I want you to think about in these terms is that, you need to substitute yourself and put yourself in their spot. That will help you to understand a little bit maybe of why they're so angry at you, why they're cheating you, why you feel like they're hurting you, causing injury to you, emotional, spiritual, physical, whatever it might be. Substitution doesn't always make it clear, but it does help. Why are they acting this way toward me? You might say walk in their shoes a little bit. Now, at the end of the day, you may look at their side of it and recognize they're still wrong. What they did to me was still wrong. Now you understand better, though, of why it occurred. Ultimately, what's one of the big questions we ask when someone mistreats us? Why? Right? And substituting, me saying, okay, let me try to look at it from their side. It does allow me sometimes to come to a little better understanding. It may not fully satiate or satisfy my anger that I have about it or my hurt that I have about it, but at least it helps me a little bit. Okay, sometimes that can help us to perhaps more easily go toward forgiving them and or loving them. The next one is a mental role play. And that's where you actually play their role. And when you begin to actually play their role, not just think about why they're acting this way, but try to walk through their life or their circumstances, suddenly you reverse it a little bit and sometimes it becomes clearer for you, okay? Another is common ground. What is the common ground? In negotiation training, we use this concept a lot. We can argue about the things we disagree about all the time. But you know what? We got to find some common ground. Because if we don't find common ground, we won't have any level of empathy toward each other and or ability to reach any kind of successful conclusions. In negotiations, if you can find no common ground, you may as well go ahead and end it. Because if you have no common ground, you have nothing to start with. A guy told me once in training, he said, look, we can't both stand on the same square. Either you have to stand on top of me or I have to stand on top of you if we can't share a square. So we have to find some common ground we both can stand on. And then it may not be comfortable, but at least we can start the process.
One can stand on one part, the other can stand on the other part of the same square.
Yeah, or like when Katie and I were taking some dancing lessons. You can't stand on my feet and I can't stand on yours. It doesn't work very well, okay? Common ground. Another is focus. What is your focus? If your focus is, I have to win, then the other person, what do they have to do? If I have to win, they have to lose. And no one likes to lose. So if you make it a win-lose proposition, there's not a lot of common ground that happens. And ultimately, someone hates, hurts, or is angry about the results. Okay? And so we really have to think about focus. So what is my focus? When it comes to a disagreement, when it comes to a dispute, what is my focus going to be? If my focus is, I'm going to crush you and pillage you and take everything I can from you, then the results are going to be pretty negative for them. And ultimately for me, because they're going to come back at me, right? They're going to hurt me or hate me or try to harm me in some way. And then this is one that I say carefully, but it is important, and that is separation. In some cases, folks, look, I can still love you, but I need to love you at a distance. The circumstance, the person, the people are either so harmful or toxic that really I don't need to cross that line. I'm not skilled enough, trained enough, capable enough, interested enough to try to fix it. So sometimes the only thing I can do is separate. Okay? I'm not suggesting that separation means I hate you, I'm never going to talk to you or think about you again. It just means, look, it's harm here. It's hurt here. It's injustice here. So the best thing for me to do is to separate. Now, I still need to pray for you. I still need to try to love on you and the opportunities there. But, you know, if somebody takes advantage of you financially and there is no guilt on their part, there is no concern on their part, then I'm going to not do business with you. You know, why do that? Okay, now, there may be an opportunity where I can offer help later. That's good. That's good. We'll let God work through that. But sometimes you do have to separate. Right? Yes.
Sometimes showing kindness and empathy toward others simply enrages them more.
Yeah, that happened to me.
You know, and that really, for even their sake, is separation.
Yeah. And here's the ultimate. Here's the last one. Recognize Jesus' example. Recognize Jesus' example and the model that he gives. And then ultimately, and this is a big one, his sacrifice. So we need to recognize Jesus' example and his sacrifice. So look, at the end of the day, he voluntarily turned himself over to the Jews' most hated enemy at the time, okay? Innocent completely, and yet he offered himself up as a sacrifice. And Pastor Larry reminded us, and Kathleen mentioned it a moment ago, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. So God calls us to remember that, look, sometimes you're going to show up at Watts and volunteer to help, and there may be not one person there who says thank you. Or they may even say something hurtful or hateful to you, okay? Jesus would have showed up the next day, right? So we just have to follow that example. I have to be different than my neighbor. I'm not going to say I have to be better than my neighbor. I have to be different than the way my neighbor reacts and acts. Okay, God calls us to do that. Now, we didn't have time today to go to verse 37. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. That is a huge taken out of context statement here. So if you wonder about that a little bit, go to John 7:24, because Jesus basically says, do not judge by mere appearances, but judge correctly. We are called as Christians to judge, but not in the way that the world defines judgment. Okay, and that's another lesson, another day. because we don't have time to go there. But again, you have to read all of this. Now, finally, real quick, here's just kind of a neat thing here. In verse 38, given it will be given to you, a good measure pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you. A typical Jewish man in particular, even a woman, they wore kind of robes, right? And they could take those robes and pick them up, and it became a huge grocery bag, if you will. Okay, they could carry a lot of things. What he's talking about is if you give well, in other words, if you love well, if you forgive well, if you show mercy well, if you give grace well, God will provide for you something that even if you take that huge robe and pick it up and carry all that you can carry in there, he will press it down. He will shake it down like wheat or grain, you know, it gets pressed down and it's more and more than you can carry. In other words, God will bless us when we treat others the way we want to be treated. God will bless us when we give others that sacrificial love and example like Jesus did. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you that you teach us there are blessings in doing these things. Even if we can't see them, feel them, or touch them, you do bless us with it. You bless us by the very fact that we have been obedient. Being obedient to you, Lord, is always a blessing, even when we don't understand. In Jesus' name. Have a great week. Don't forget to see Rusty if you can help with Watts, okay? And don't forget dark baseball tonight.